like you to be familiar with the language of the environment rating scales. The first word that we use a lot is scale, and the scale applies to which one of these basically age groups we're observing. So one of the scales is the ITERS, one is the ECHRS. There's also the family child care, which we call FICRS, and the other is the school age. We call that SACRS or SACRS. So drilling down a little bit further, I'm sorry, does this keep showing up for you guys too?
It is, yeah.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know why it does that. But the subscales are the way each of the rating scales is broken up, and the subscales are basically categories or groupings of similar items. And so we have subscales that are space and furnishings, personal care routines, listening and talking, and so on. And so those are groups of similar items. And then the items are the individual things in each of the subscales. Most subscales have 4 or more different items that get scored. And then indicators are the very specific details that we're looking for in each of those items. So that gives you a little bit of background anyway. And when we are talking about subscales and items and indicators, it will help you hopefully understand what level. Indicators are the finest level we go down to, and a scale is the largest. Okay, I want to go over a couple definitions before we really get into each of the items throughout the rating scale. First of all, the difference between infants and toddlers. For our purposes, infants are all the children in infant-toddler classrooms that are younger than 12 months. And toddlers then would be those children from 12 months up to 2.5 years of age, so 30 months. For most of you, that's probably standard language. I think one difference is that we still consider toddlers who are 2 to 2.5. Those children that age are still toddlers, although licensing changes ratios once kids are or changes group size once children reach the age of 2. So in some people's minds, that changes them a little bit. Next is available and accessible. You may have materials or space in your program, and then we would define that as available. It is also accessible if children can reach it and use it, access it. So that's one big difference. Sometimes after I've completed an observation, somebody will ask me, well, you said we didn't have this. And I'll say, well, no, it was available in the classroom, but if none of the children could reach it, it wasn't accessible. And throughout the rating scale, what we're scoring is children's ability to access and use materials. So that's an important distinction. For several of the items throughout the rating scale, we are actually scoring minimal accessibility. And what I mean by that is that those particular items have to be accessible for a minimum amount of time during the day, and other items will get scored at certain indicator levels for much of the day, and much of the day means that it's available for more time. And we will talk, well, I guess I will explain what much of the day is to you right now. Many people are very intimidated by this concept, and I will let you know that it has a significant impact on scoring the ITERS rating scale. Much of the day is the phrase that we use to define how much time children have access to materials, and it's possible to lose credit for much of the day when a child cannot reach or access materials for more than 20 minutes, when the same child cannot reach and access those materials for more than 20 minutes during the 3-hour observation. So it's not 20 minutes a day, it's during the time that your rater is there doing the observation. And much of the day can be calculated as one block of time, or it can be several smaller blocks of time that total a minimum of 20 minutes where children can't access materials. And it can also be determined because possibly a child who is mobile cannot get to the materials. For instance, maybe a child is in a bouncy seat or in an exerciser or something like that, and they cannot actually get to the materials. Or it could be for a non-mobile child who isn't able to reach the materials, and the materials are not brought to that child. So there's a lot of things that we look at when we are scoring in your classrooms, and many of them have some bearing on much of the day. So I think what's most important for you to remember is that if a child who is awake and ready to play cannot use materials or space or equipment for 20 minutes, then you will not receive credit for much of the day for all of the children in the whole room for the entire observation. And that can have a significant impact on your score. And then the next concept that we will also talk about is many and varied, and that refers to how many different materials are available to a child, or books or experiences, and how varied they are. I mean, maybe you have 30 rattles that are certainly fine motor materials, but if they're all the same, there's not much variety. And so we're looking for both quantity and variety in materials. So here is a list of some of the resources that we use when we score. When we complete the observation, while we are in the classroom, we take notes about what we observe and what we hear. When we go to score, we use the All About the ITERS book. We use the additional notes for clarification and any Wisconsin interpretations that apply to the item that we're scoring. The All About the ITERS, just like the All About the ECHRS book, those books are available for purchase through Kaplan. I know we heard from somebody else that they can be purchased online through Amazon and maybe other places as well. The additional notes for clarification and the Wisconsin interpretations are documents that we update each year, and those are available on the YoungStar website. And if you're not sure how to find the YoungStar website, contact your technical consultant, and he or she will be able to help you locate those materials. But they are available. They're in PDF form. You can download them, print them off, and you can share them in every one of your classrooms. And they're available for each of the rating scales, each of the age groups. So on this slide, I list the subscales that are included in the ITERS. There's first, space and furnishings. There's the personal care routine subscale, listening and talking, activities, interactions, program structure, and parents and staff. The parents and staff subscale is not scored at all for any program in all of YoungStar. We don't use that part of the ITERS because the Department of Children and Families has developed their own document called the evaluation criteria, and that covers most of the things that would be covered by the parents and staff subscale. So as you will see, there are 6 subscales, and these are the areas that we are observing when we are in your program, and we're scoring the items in these subscales. So here's the first of our question breaks. If anybody has submitted a question, Andrea will let me know.
So here's a specific question for 2-year-olds. Will you receive credit for accessible, quote unquote, when items might not be at their level but are labeled with pictures and they're able to ask to use it, such as Play-Doh?
If we observe that an item is not accessible to a child, but that when the child indicates he or she wants to use it, it is provided for them, then we can give credit. But let me just say that Play-Doh is not required for this age. So, I mean, even for a 2-year-old, Play-Doh isn't a requirement. But, I mean, that's wonderful if you make it available as appropriate. But yes, I would say that if you have a bucket of some kind of material that is out of reach of the child, but the child knows what it is and where it is, and when they indicate that they want it, you put it down so the child can access it, then we could give credit for much of the day, but we would need to see that in action as well, because if the child has to wait a long time before you are able to get that for him or her, then we would not consider that accessible.
And so, like markers in a bin, if you can reach the bin and ask for it to be opened, then they would be accessible, if the child can reach the bin.
If the child can reach the bin, and if the child can get the bin open, and so it doesn't have a lid on it or some kind of barrier preventing the child from accessing it, then those are considered accessible.
But if they need to ask for it to be opened?
As long as it's opened right away for them and they don't have to wait for it, or we sometimes hear, no, not now, we're not using that, then we would not consider that accessible.
And so in terms of non-mobile infants, how do you make sure that things are accessible to them?
usually what we see is that a basket of materials is prepared in advance. This is not uncommon at all to see, several baskets in a child care program in a non-mobile infant room, where these baskets have a variety of materials, some soft toys, maybe a book or two, rattles, teethers, different kinds of materials, maybe a stuffed animal, maybe a little doll, and then placing that basket with those materials next to a child who may be sitting up but can't crawl yet. And so then the child can access those materials that are in that basket. And having one available for each child like that, or moving a child next to the toy shelf where the toys are stored is another way to do that. I've seen it done successfully both of those ways.
And what about with a child in a bouncy seat?
Well, a child in a bouncy seat obviously can't get to anything, and probably it just depends. These are very specific questions that will depend on several things during the observation. If the child is in a bouncy seat because he or she just finished eating and is sort of in the process of falling asleep, then we don't consider that child awake and ready to play. And some people use bouncy seats to soothe the child before they're going to put them down for naps. So that's one time. Some children are in bouncy seats just to corral them. And if we observe that and it's clear that the child can sit up on their own, and we all know what that looks like, they're trying to sit up in that seat and they're trying to reach things and they cry and they're frustrated and they're twisting in there and they can't get to any materials, then that would definitely be time that counts against much of the day. It's not uncommon for an infant to be placed in a bouncy seat, and one of those little baby gyms or a bar with toys that hang from it is placed in front of or over the baby, and the baby can access those materials, and those materials are credited. Then typically they're fine motor, sometimes there's a soft toy, sometimes there's something that makes music, and so those materials get credit in those categories. But generally speaking, they don't get credit for many and varied, because usually there's only 3 of them hanging from that bar.
And is it true that they can't be in an exercise or bouncy seat, etc., for more than 20 minutes a day?
We don't mandate that. If we're there doing an observation and a child is in a bouncy seat or exercise or something for more than 20 minutes during the time that we're there, we're going to probably score off for much of the day for a lot of the materials, and definitely for active physical play, because the child is not able to get out, move around, and quite possibly they will not receive much of the day credit for peer interactions either. So yes, but there's not a rule that I'm aware of. There is something else that gets scored in formal rating in an infant classroom where children are put into pieces of restrictive equipment like that. It is not in the ITERS, but it is in, it's an optional point for YoungStar, and it's one that we call active physical or physical activity. And that, you do not earn credit for that point if any child is in a piece of restrictive equipment like that for more than 15 consecutive minutes. And so not only, if you put a child in a bouncy seat, let's say, or an exercise or something for, let's say, 21 minutes, you will not receive credit for that physical activity point that's part of the evaluation criteria for YoungStar, and you will miss much of the day for other things throughout the ITERS rating scale. So.
Let's move on.
Yes, okay, because otherwise we could get really bogged down with much of the day, and I don't want to spend all our time on that. We have lots to cover. One thing that I did do throughout this PowerPoint is I put in red ink the things where much of the day actually is scored. So on this page, in this subscale, which is space and furnishings, you will see that provision for relaxation and comfort is an item where much of the day is considered. So, but I'm going to start at the top with indoor space. Many of you were here already for the ITERS, and a lot of the indicators in indoor space are similar, so I'm only going to touch on some highlights. One of the things that we score that's different in ITERS is at the 7 level that floors, walls, and other built-in surfaces are made of easy-to-clean materials. And basically what that means is that if you have high chairs that you use for feeding infants and toddlers in your room, or even a feeding table, or I mean a table and chairs, that we at this level, the 7 level, would want to see that that is not on carpet. It can be on tile, it could be on a vinyl runner or something that you've put over the carpet, but something that's waterproof and that you can wipe up, that you could mop up if necessary. So also if you're using a table for an art activity in infants and in an infant toddler classroom, that we would want to see that as well at the 7 level to be on a surface that's easy to clean. Furniture for routine care and play. The things here that are frequently scored off in an infant room are indicator 3.1, which is enough furniture for routine care, and usually it's because cubbies are not large enough to contain all of the individual children's possessions, and that is a requirement, that cubbies be large enough to hold everything that belongs to an individual child, so that their possessions are not coming into contact with the possessions of other children. Another thing that is sometimes scored off is at 3.4, seats for children are comfortable and supportive. And this is where if you use a group feeding table, it would be scored off here, as well as at 5.1. But usually it's stopped here first because in group feeding tables, children are seated up high and their legs dangle in those chairs, and the authors have made a determination that that is not considered comfortable and supportive for children. So you should be aware of that. If you have toddlers in a room, there should be child-sized tables and chairs used with them. If your room does not have any toddlers in it, then that can be scored NA. We do expect in an infant toddler room to see some adult seating for use in routine care, and at the 5 level they can use a preschool size chair or something. They can modify some other piece of equipment in the room so that they can have seating. At the 7 level it needs to be adult sized, and it does need to have a backrest and be comfortable, provide appropriate support, and we do need to see it observed being used. So sitting in a rocking chair, feeding a baby a bottle is a very good example of seeing adult-sized seating that is appropriate and comfortable and supportive for the adult used in routine care. Okay, so provision for relaxation and comfort. This is the first item in the rating scale where we consider much of the day, and this is addressing the need for children to have some kind of softness in their environment, both in terms of soft toys and also furnishings that allow them to escape the hardness of the floor. So at indicator 3.2, it reads 3 or more soft toys are accessible for much of the day. So already at the 3 level, in this one, if you run into the barrier of much of the day, this will not be able to score higher than a 2 because of that. So you want to make sure that children have access to soft toys, and then at the 5 level that there's a cozy area, and a cozy area could be just any small area that's set aside that is protected from active play and that provides a substantial amount of softness. It could be a crib mattress that you put on the floor in a corner. I've seen like infant, little wading pools that have been filled with like a boppy and some cushions and something like that, where you can place a non-mobile infant to be in a cushioned environment but also protected from other more active children in the space. Those would be considered cozy areas. And at 5.1, that cozy area would be accessible for much of the day, and at 5.3, many soft toys would need to be accessible for much of the day. Throughout the rating scale, when they say many or some, in the notes for clarification, the authors have given some specific guidance for how many that means. So for this particular one, where it says many soft toys accessible much of the day, it says to meet the requirement of many, there should be at least 10 soft toys and at least 2 per child if there are more than 5 children. So make sure that if you're preparing for a formal rating observation and you have the ITERS rating scale and you're using that to practice and to prepare, that you refer to the notes for clarification. Those are right in the book. The additional notes for clarification, like I mentioned earlier, are available on the YoungStar website. But please read those because those give you the additional information that you need. for determining if you have many or some or whatever. A couple other things about this one. Non-mobile infants need to be placed in the cozy area when appropriate. At the 7 level, that has to be observed when we're there. So if you don't do it while we're there, then you wouldn't get credit. And then also 7.3, the cozy area used for reading or other quiet play, that would also have to be observed while the rater is present. The next item is room arrangement, and this refers to how the room is set up so that the staff can easily see all of the children at a glance, and so that children can access materials without interfering with what other children are doing, so that quiet and active play are separated from each other, and that toys are stored so that they are easily accessible to the children, and also that traffic patterns don't interfere with activities. So the biggest thing that usually is a barrier with room arrangement is that the diaper changing table is maybe set up so that when a teacher is changing diapers, her back is to the room and she can't see all of the children. So that can be a barrier to good supervision. And if a program puts up mirrors to be able to see into the room while the teacher's back is to the room, that will get credit at the 3 level but not at the 5 level. So I believe that most of those indicators there otherwise are pretty straightforward. So the last item in this subscale is display for children. And display for children is pretty obvious. It's the things that you put up throughout the room to be visually appealing to the children. So there should be at least 3 colorful pictures and or other materials displayed where children can easily see them at the 3 level. To score higher, you would want to have many of those items. There is a requirement in an infant toddler classroom that there be 3-dimensional mobiles or other colorful hanging objects for children to look at. And there need to be 2 examples of that in the classroom. They need to be experienced by all children. So a mobile hanging over a single child's crib would not get credit here. But a mobile that's hanging over the diaper changing table, since presumably you're using the changing table for every child at some point during the day, that would be credited here. There's also a requirement at the 5 level that we observe staff talking to the children about the displayed materials. So that has to be observed during the 3 hours that we're present. Okay. Questions?
So,
yes?
Can a table or high chair be used for an art activity as well as a feeding table, or do they need to be separate?
No, that's acceptable.
And do diaper bags have to be in cubbies?
Diaper bags do not have to be in cubbies. If you're using diaper bags and you want them to be convenient and accessible for the staff in the room, probably they'll be hanging from hooks, and that's fine too, as long as the contents of the bags are all inside the bags, not hanging out and touching the contents of other bags or accessible to children. But yes, diaper bags can be used, and the outsides of diaper bags can come into contact with the outsides of other children's diaper bags.
Can children be changed on the floor as long as they're on a pad?
The pad has to be large enough so that the entire child is on the pad. So it can't be something small that if the child's feet or arms or something come into contact with the floor, that wouldn't get credit. It also would not get credit for at a higher level for being a convenient furnishing for the adult, because that is often not convenient. It's difficult. It's more difficult for adults to get down on the floor like that than it is for the children. So it's not considered convenient for the teacher generally. And you also run into issues with needing to sanitize the floor if anything comes into contact with the floor. If you put the soiled diaper, for instance, on the floor next to that changing pad, that's not going to score well.
And I just have one gentle reminder that many people didn't attend ITERS, so, just keep them in mind.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Are high chairs considered comfortable and supportive?
If they're not slippery and if the children's feet are supported in them, and they can be, yes.
So
usually, in my experience, they are.
So there needs to be a footrest.
Correct.
Right.
Yes. And we're going to move on. We have a lot to do, and I'm afraid we're not going to get to a lot of things if we do lots of questions right now. So if you can hold your questions till the end, like Andrea said, we'll stay on for a while afterwards, and we'll try to get to things. The next subscale is the personal care routines. And actually, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because there are two places where you can get a lot of this information, and as you all may know, or probably have heard, that this stuff gets pretty specific about the proper hand washing routine and the proper changing table sanitation and the proper diapering procedure and all of those things. And I can assure you that your technical consultant has those descriptions of those procedures that they can share with you. And I also want to just state up front that you are required to follow licensing rules for things, and I will mention what those are, but I just want to mention that too, that even if something might be acceptable, if not best practice in an ITERS observation, if it doesn't meet your licensing requirements for a specific way that you wash hands or something, then it's still not right. I mean, it has to meet licensing requirements. So just wanted to mention that right up front. And we're going to go through this one very quickly so that we can get into a little bit more of the meat of the activities and supervision and things. So first of all, greeting and departing. The only thing that I really want to mention here is that at the 3.4 indicator, it is a requirement that every time a child is dropped off by a parent in the program, that we observe that there is an exchange of child-specific information, and that's in 100% of greetings. So that's very important. Each time a parent brings a child into your room and is going to leave that child with you, there needs to be some exchange of information. And if the parent doesn't offer the information, then it is your responsibility to ask for it. And some examples of child-specific information could be things like, when did he wake up? When was her last diaper change? Did she sleep through the night last night? I know you went to the doctor yesterday because you were concerned about temperature and teething, and so what did you find out? When was the last time he had his antibiotic? Whatever, these kinds of information, we are required to see these in 100% of greetings. And that's at indicator 3.4. So it's very important that you get in the habit, and most of you are already doing this, but just know that we're going to be listening to those interactions and we're going to score that accordingly. Next is meals and snacks. There's quite a bit of detail here. I guess some of the highlights that I would want to mention would be not to use a microwave for heating bottles or baby food, or even the water that you're using for mixing formula. Any use of a microwave in an ITERS classroom for heating, especially bottles, is going to be a score of a 1 automatically, and as you probably know, a 1 is the lowest score you can get. So just if you can avoid using a microwave at all, that is going to be your best practice with this. Also, using water that is heated to a temperature higher than 120 degrees is going to get scored off at the 1 level as well. So it is not at all uncommon for us to see a crock pot with water in it that is heated, used for warming infant bottles. And when we come in, we're going to measure the temperature of the water in the crock pot. And if it exceeds 120 degrees, we will have to score that off. So bear that in mind. I have, honestly, it's kind of surprising, but I've seen crock pots that have water temperature in them of greater than 200 degrees, which is very close to boiling, as you know. So pay attention to that. One of the other things that's a sticky point for scoring in meals and snacks is how closely you're supervising, especially with toddlers who are maybe feeding themselves. The expectation in an ITERS room is that there is always a staff person within arm's reach of any child who is eating. So keep that in mind. And then there's the sanitation, hand washing and cleaning and sanitizing tables. And please remember that licensing requires a two-step cleaning and sanitation process, which is exactly what the ITERS requires. And that means you clean the table first with a soap and water solution and a single-use cloth, whether it's cloth or paper, and then you sanitize the table after you have done that first step of cleaning. You sanitize it by spraying an approved sanitizer and allowing the sanitizer to remain on the surface for as long as is required by the manufacturer of that. Okay, the next item that we are going to look at is NAP. And just so you're aware, at the 1 level, swaddling infants is scored off. And we are well aware that there are many programs around the state that swaddle infants because parents request it or because it's part of their philosophy. And there is not a Wisconsin interpretation that allows that, so if we observe swaddling, we have to score off for it. And that is not a commentary on whether or not we believe it's right or good for parents to do that with their children. It's just the way that standard is written, and we have to score it that way. So you should be prepared for that. Licensing does require that infants, that all children have 2 linens, one to lie on and one to cover with. So if you are using a blanket as opposed to a sleep sack, for infants under 12 months, we will expect to see that you tuck that blanket in snugly on 3 sides of the mattress and that it doesn't get above about shoulder height on the child. So no blankets around a baby's face. That's really the only other thing I guess I'll mention about nap is that if you use a separate nap room, and you do not have a staff person that remains in the nap room the entire time that any child is in there sleeping, it will score off at the 1 level. That's the way the rating scale is written. We understand that licensing might permit you to do that, but for the purposes of using the ITERS, it's not going to score well. So just be aware of that as well. Diapering and toileting, I'm not going to go into this too much because most of this is about the diaper changing procedure and sanitation and hand washing. So just be aware that you can contact your technical consultant and he or she will have the procedures already written out for you. They can email those to you or share them with you whatever way is convenient, and that will let you know exactly the steps that we're looking for. And this is another spot where if somebody was changing a child's diaper on the floor, that it would be scored off at 5.3 for the provisions being convenient and accessible. The changing table needs to be comfortable for the staff to use. So that's another spot where we consider that. Health practices, again, is referring to lots of hand washing and sanitation, making sure that toys that have been mouthed by babies get removed for cleaning. If children are old enough to be using sand outside, then covering the sand, the outdoor sandbox when it's not in use, that's something that's scored here. Having health information available for parents, but again, the primary thing here is hand washing, I would say. And finally, in personal care routines is safety practices, and this is where we're looking for safety hazards indoors and outdoors. And safety hazards can be anything from inappropriate gross motor equipment to items that are labeled keep out of reach of children that have not been locked away, or uncovered outlets, or using thumbtacks in the classroom where children are still putting everything in their mouths because thumbtacks or staples might fall on the ground and you may not notice them, but it's amazing what those little toddlers can find when they're looking. So those are things that are covered in safety practices. One other thing that I want to just say as sort of a caveat for the whole personal care routine subscale is that many people around the state, and I've been doing this since YoungStar started, so for 3 years now, over 3 years, I've been out doing observations, and I know that many of you get very anxious about these things, hand washing, diapering, cleaning sinks, cleaning tables, and I want to assure you that there are programs around the state, many programs that have reached 4 stars and even some that have reached 5 stars that have low scores in these items. And so it's very possible to actually stick to your personal philosophy about, let's say, swaddling a baby or whatever, and take a low score in NAP and still earn enough credit in your overall observation to make 4 or 5 stars. So I would like to encourage each one of you to relax, do the best that you can with these things, with hand washing, follow licensing rules, but then focus on the things that are very, very important about caring for children: supervision, use of language, warm and positive and nurturing interactions, those things. And then kind of slide past this as much as possible. I see Andrea's got some questions for me.
So there are several questions about warming bottles. So I'm trying to synthesize them into one question. But do you have advice for if you don't have all you have is a microwave? So what do you do then if you don't have a, what is it, a crock pot?
Or something else, or a bottle warmer. All you have is a microwave.
You need to get something else?
Or serve bottles at room temperature. There's lots and lots of programs that I see where they keep bottled water on the countertop, and it's just literally it's at room temperature. They have gallons of bottled water there. It's room temperature. They mix it with formula, so if the babies will take it that way, that's one way. There is not a requirement for this that you heat the bottles. So if babies will take them at room temperature, there are some babies that will take them cold. I don't think very many, but there are some. A bottle warmer, there's little bottle warmers that you put like, you know, a teaspoon of water into them, and that steams and heats the bottle from underneath. They don't take up any room on the counter, and they're very quick. And I see those used, and because the water literally steams off, like in less than 2 minutes, there's not a water temperature thing that we're testing. So that's an option. I mean, if you have room on your counter for a microwave, I would suggest that it would be possible to remove the microwave and plug in 2 bottle warmers in much less space.
What if you heat up the water in the microwave, take it out, and then you put the bottle in the hot water?
We're going to test that, the temperature of that, and I have tested that as well. Even for, I was at a program recently where I did that, and the water temperature was like 180 degrees after that. So anything exceeding 120 degrees is not going to score well. Remember that. But also I would say if you have a sink in your room and you have hot tap water that doesn't exceed 120 degrees, and if you're able, if you know a child is going to be needing to eat sometime in the next 10 minutes, and you can just use hot tap water and put the bottle in that, it's going to warm it up, you know, not above 120 degrees, but it will at least take the chill off. You would just have to plan a little bit further in advance, probably more than 2 or 3 minutes. But those are some options.
And then just a couple questions also. There were several about communications. And so if you've got a written communication, if you've got a daily sheet that the parent fills out that asks those specific questions, is that acceptable? Does it have to be verbal?
That is acceptable, the written form of that, as long as it's clear that the teacher also checks it. I was in a program, this is just an example, I was doing a formal rating somewhere where the parents were filling those out, but the teachers were not reading them. And at one point, an hour and a half or 2 hours into the observation, they were trying to calm a specific child, and they said, well, when did he eat last? And they said, I don't know, I never read that. So even though the parents were communicating it, it was not being received. So bear in mind that it has to be reciprocal. So I look, when I'm doing an observation, if it's a written communication, I look to see if the teacher actually takes the time to read that. So, but yes, if it's written down and you as the teacher are receiving the information, then that definitely receives credit.
And so there are some other questions, but I would like to come back to them at the end. So thanks so much for your patience, everyone. I just want to make sure we get through everything. We've got 131 people on the webinar, so lots of questions, but Rebecca and I will stay here till they're all answered. So.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next subscale, and this next subscale is only 3 items, listening and talking. Helping children understand language, helping children use language, and using books. And again, you'll see that the books item there is in red, so that is another place, another one of the items where we are scoring much of the day. So the first one of these is helping children understand language. And basically what this boils down to is, are you talking to these children while you're spending time with them? And so my recommendation would be to talk to them about everything you're doing. Watch your tone of voice, but even if these are babies who are not yet vocalizing at all, there's not any reason that you can't talk to them while you're changing their diaper or while you're preparing their bottle. It's really about talking. Use their names, talk during routines and playtime, so during bottle feedings, during diaper changes, during hand washing, those are routine care times. Also when you're sitting down on the floor and a child's playing, you know, talk then. Holding them on your lap, whatever it is you're doing, talk to them, tell them what you're doing, tell them what things look like, the sounds that things make, what the materials are that you're using, what toys they're playing with, identify pictures in books, all of these things. Talk, talk, talk. Remember that your tone of voice is important. The words that you use are also important. Make them specific and clear. Make them appropriate for the children. Use their names like I already mentioned. But this item can score very high. It's not at all uncommon to see a score of 7 here. A couple things, 7.2, which is very high in scoring this item, is that staff take part in verbal play with children, and this is something that we do have to observe. So we would want to see you maybe do patty cake with them, maybe sing to them, do so big, something like that. Anything where you're maybe changing your tone of voice, you're mimicking their vocalizations back to them, talking in baby talk, something, but it's verbal play and interaction with the child, and we do have to observe that at least once. The next item is helping children use language. So again, if you're using language and you are responding to their vocalizations, you are helping them use language. But the one thing that I often see here that stops the score at a lower score in this particular item is when there's not a fairly quick response when children are crying. I encourage teachers in infant rooms, especially young infant rooms, to remember that crying is babies' language. And so although they are not talking back to you, that's how, or they're not talking to you with words, that's how they're talking to you. And so at the indicator 3.1, it reads moderate amount of verbal or nonverbal positive response to children's attempts to communicate. So if a baby's crying, they're communicating with you, and so we would expect to hear you say something back to them. And of course it also says a positive response. It says little or no ignoring of children or negative response. So if a child is crying very hard and they're in their crib and you can't get to them because you're changing somebody else's diaper, we understand that, and we don't expect you to finagle both of those things, but we would expect to hear you call out or acknowledge the child who's crying in their crib, waiting for you to be able to come to them. So some kind of acknowledgement from across the room or something, using the baby's name, you know, we will note that even if the child continues to cry, as long as you continue to respond, that can score okay. So at the 5 level, we're looking for a timely and positive manner. So if a child's crying for 5 minutes and crying hard and there has been no response, that won't score well there. If the child is crying for 5 minutes but you continue to talk to him through those 5 minutes while you finish up that other diaper change, you're at least acknowledging that child in a timely manner. So just keep those things in mind. And obviously many of you work with children who are vocalizing, whether they're speaking baby talk and gibberish or actually starting to use words. But these 2 items, helping children understand and use language, are all about you talking and responding to children and encouraging them to talk or vocalize back to you. And then using books. So here we do consider much of the day, and this is the only indicator or the only item in the whole rating scale where much of the day is considered at the 1 level. So if you miss that much of the day, you're going to, the highest score you can get here for books would be a 1, and that's important for you to know. What we're looking for here is that children have access to appropriate books and enough of those appropriate books to be stimulating. So indicator 1.1 reads fewer than 6 appropriate books accessible. 3.1 says at least 6 are accessible. 5.1 says at least 12 are accessible, but no fewer than 2 for each child in the group. So, you know, figure out how many kids you have in that room and then do the math to see how many books you need to have there. Make sure that they are not only available, but they are also accessible. And then make sure that you are placing those books where non-mobile children can see the pictures in them, can experience them. Certainly there's not an expectation that a non-mobile child would sit up and turn the pages in those books, but some exposure to those books. And these books can be board books, they can be vinyl books, cloth books. I give credit for a child having access to a book even if the only thing the baby does is grab a cloth book and put it in his mouth. I mean, he's still got a book. Of course, it's better if you hold the baby on your lap and are flipping through the pages of that book, but access is important. We also do have to observe that you are having a book time. Indicator 5.3, staff read books daily with individuals or very small groups of interested children, so this is something that has to be observed. And then 5.4, book times are warm and interactive. That also has to be observed. So those are all the items in listening and talking. So we're going to move on to activities, and you will see that many more of these, now that we're getting into activities, require children to have access to materials for much of the day. So the first one of these is fine motor. Fine motor materials are described in the rating scale in the notes for clarification, so I'm not going to get into that too much. Make sure that you read what things count, how many things you need, but at the 3 level already, much of the day is scored. So you want to make sure that they have access to those materials. The next one is active physical play. This refers to gross motor play that infants and toddlers have available to them. So it also refers to both the space and to the equipment and the materials that they use. Obviously, an infant that is not yet mobile, not crawling or anything, they need less space for gross motor play, because they can lie on the floor and kick and wave their arms, and that is their gross motor play, their active physical play. But you do need to make sure then that they have the ability to do that for much of the day. So older children who are mobile should be able to crawl, roll, walk, run, whatever it is their skills are, for much of the day to receive credit at the 3 level. You also want to be sure that the equipment that you have is appropriate, so no tall climbing equipment, nothing taller than 32 inches in an ITERS classroom, so small slides and climbers would be appropriate. Also, anything, remember this is very important, anything that has a fall height greater than 18 inches does need to have appropriate cushioning, and the cushioning needs to cover the fall space that's required for that piece of equipment as well. So cushioning outdoors, the most commonly used cushioning is loose fill cushioning like rubber mulch or wood mulch. Indoors, if you are using any equipment that has a fall height greater than 18 inches, then you would probably need to have some kind of shock absorbing surface like a mat or these kind of foam tiles, and if you're using that, we will request to see the manufacturer's information about that to make sure that it's in compliance with the requirements. And again, there's more specific information about that you could request from your technical consultant. Also, I should mention that my email is available at the end of this PowerPoint, and you could contact me by email as well, and I would be happy to send you some more specific information if you can't get it from your TC. But the active physical play item usually scores pretty low for one or both of these reasons. Either much of the day was not met or the play space is not safe and appropriate. So you should be aware of that. The next item is art. Art, as you see here, can be scored NA, and Art materials are not required for children under the age of 12 months. So if you have an infant classroom where all of the children are younger than 12 months and you do not use art materials in that classroom, you can report that to the rater and the rater will score it NA. If you have a classroom with children younger than 12 months and you do use art materials, we will have to score it. And so then some of the considerations are how appropriate are the materials that you're using with the children, and are children required to participate, and we consider that they are required to participate if you put them in a high chair or some kind of group table and they cannot get away, and you give them art materials and that's all they have to do. We would say that they are being required to participate. So my recommendation would be that if you have a room with children all younger than 12 months and it is not part of your program philosophy or something to do art, that you just save that for when they're toddlers and they move into the next room. And be comfortable with a score of NA. A score of NA will never hurt your overall score. The next item is music and movement. Music materials should be available to children at the 3.1 indicator. It says for much of the day. Music materials for infants and toddlers can be things like rattles or bells, anything that they can shake that makes noise. Also toys that they might push a button on or something, or I know there's little kicking pads and things that they kick at them and then they light up and they play music, and those get credit here. One of the things that is often scored off in music is indicator 5.4, that recorded music is used at limited times and with a positive purpose. So first of all, let me say that if you play nap music during nap time and it's on for 2 hours, that's fine. That is different from this. What this refers to is if you turn music on at 8:30 in the morning and you leave it on till 9:30 or 10 o'clock and it's just background noise, then that is not considered a limited time with a positive purpose. Maybe you turn it on at 8:30 because you're going to do a marching band with the toddlers in the room, and then you just forget to turn it off and it just becomes background noise. While it's being used for this specific activity, that's fine, but if after that, when you forget about it and walk away and it's just on as background noise, if that amount of time exceeds 20 minutes, it will be scored off. So just keep that in mind. And the reason for that is because often there's music in the background that begins to interfere with language because it becomes loud. The noise level in the classroom can become too high, and it can interfere with both children and staff being able to hear and communicate with each other. Okay, the next item. Okay, there's a question for me.
So just one. So how old would you recommend art start at?
Well, if children are older than 12 months, it is required at that point. But it's not required for children younger than 12 months. So I personally am not going to make a recommendation. I'm just letting you know how it will score. And I will say that many things that people often consider art in infant rooms are not really art experiences. They're more like sensory experiences. And so if you just kind of keep that in mind, and if you want to use a paintbrush with water to paint the bottom of a baby's foot because that's a sensory experience, that's fine. If you want to use that to paint the bottom of their foot with paint to then put on paper, that's an art experience, but it's really a sensory experience. I mean, that child is not expressing him or herself by doing that. So I would just say that you can do that without having the art materials and still give the child a wonderful sensory experience. But I'm not going to make a recommendation because it doesn't really matter. I'm just letting you all know how it scores and what's required. Okay, the next one is blocks. This is another item that can be scored NA if all the children in the classroom are younger than 12 months. And actually it will be scored NA even if you put blocks in the room, if all of the children are younger than 12 months. If some of the children are older than 12 months, then we will score it. But it's possible to have a mixed age group, and by that I mean maybe some kids under 12 months who are non-mobile and some who are older than 12 months. And if that's the case, the non-mobile children who may not get much of the day that would not count against your score for much of the day for blocks if the mobile children have access for much of the day. So just be aware of that. Blocks are one of the items where much of the day is taken into consideration, and it is considered at the 3 level. So the book does a very good job of describing how many blocks and the size of blocks, but let me just emphasize that there is a size requirement for blocks. In order to meet the definition of blocks for the rating scale, the block needs to be 2 inches on a majority of sides, and their interlocking blocks such as Duplos or Mega Blocks do not get credit here as blocks, even though many people call them blocks. So these are looking for smooth-sided blocks. Large vinyl cubes count. Large square, like cubes, maybe ABC cubes, sometimes they're plastic, sometimes they're wood. Those can count as long as they are over 2 inches on a side.
Rebecca, can you just define what much of the day means again?
Much of the day is again referring to the amount of time that children would not actually have access to materials, and it's a total of 20 minutes. If a child does not have access to materials for 20 minutes or more during the observation, then you would not receive credit for much of the day for the items in question. And it's the same child. So you might have one child that goes into a bouncy seat for 10 minutes, and another child that goes into a bouncy seat for 10 minutes, and another child that's in an exerciser for 12 minutes. And they're 3 different children, and no single child exceeds 20 minutes, then that is not a problem for you. But if the same child spends 10 minutes in a bouncy seat, 10 minutes in the exerciser, 10 minutes in the Johnny Jump Up, 10 minutes in their height chair with no materials and not being fed, that adds up to more than 20 minutes for the same child, then you do not get credit for much of the day. The next item is dramatic play, and again the materials are highlighted in the book, or they're identified, what things are required. Again, it scores much of the day, so you want to make sure that at least blocks and soft animals are accessible for much of the day, because that's what's required at the 3 level. It includes dolls and soft animals. I hope I said that right. Did I the first time? Okay, the next item is sand and water play, and this will be marked NA if all of the children in the classroom are younger than 18 months. So it is not a requirement for you to have sand and water play for children younger than 18 months. The thing that is usually what stops the score with this item is indicator 3.2, which reads close supervision of sand and water play. And if we see any instances while we are observing of a child eating or throwing the materials in the sensory table, whether it's sand or water, whatever, we will have to score off at that 3 level. And I will just tell you that's a hard thing for us, because sometimes we know the teacher is right there. One time I was doing an observation and the teacher was sitting at the table with 2 children, and both of the children put the sand in their mouths even though the teacher was right there. And I had to score off for it, but that was hard for me because it was clear that she was right there and she was paying attention. So just be aware of that. So this is another place where I would say that if the children are all younger than 18 months, I would definitely not worry about having this available, because it almost always doesn't score very well. Okay. The next activity is nature and science, and you will see here that this is one that does not score much of the day. So you don't have to worry about that so much here. You do need to provide some opportunities in the classroom and outdoors as well for children to experience nature and science. And some means more than one. So there should be some pictures, books, or toys that represent nature realistically. So cartoon drawings of animals do not get credit here. They need to be realistic depictions. They also need to be developmentally appropriate, so not scary. And then there need to be some experiences where children can get outside and experience the natural world outdoors at least a couple times a week. But licensing requires that you're going out as well, so you probably already are doing that. Use of TV, video, and or computers, we refer to this as screen time, and the rating scale, if you have purchased the little blue spiral-bound book, it will say 12 months in here. But the additional notes for clarification have been changed. That has been changed, so there should be no use of screen time with children younger than 24 months of age. So be aware of that. If you're using TVs, videos, computers, something like that in your room and you have children younger than 24 months, this is going to automatically score a 1. And I will just share a quick example of one that I observed where it was a classroom with everybody was under 12 months, but there were a couple kids who were just starting to walk, and at one point a teacher handed one of these children her iPhone, and the child was playing with the iPhone. There was not a computer in the room, there was not a TV in the room, but she gave her iPhone to this child to play with, and so automatically this received a score of a 1. So even things like that, an iPad, some of those leapfrog, is that what it is? I can't remember. I think they're leapfrog screen toys. Those get counted here. So pay attention to that. And then their access to it, if they are over 24 months and you are using it, it needs to be very limited. No more than 30 minutes total in a week. And also alternative activities should be available. So if you put everybody at the table while you're making lunch and turn the TV on, and so they don't have any alternative activities to use, that's not going to score well. And the last of the items in the activity subscale is promoting acceptance of diversity. And what we're looking for here are books, pictures, and materials in the environment that have positive depictions of race, culture, age, ability, and gender. So these materials need to be accessible to the children. They need to be, if they're pictures, they need to be down at the kids' level where they can see them. So make sure they're not up high. Make sure that you haven't put a picture up on top of a bookshelf and so a child can't see it. Make sure that if you are having materials such as puzzles or blocks that are possibly going to receive credit for diversity, that they are accessible, that you haven't stored them in a manner that the kids can't get at them. You can have materials that are maybe musical instruments from other countries like maracas or a rain stick. Those things could be appropriate at this age level and they are good depictions of diversity. Music, playing music that is multicultural is another good place to get some of this diversity. At the 5 level for this, dolls representing at least 3 races must be accessible. So keep that in mind. I know that there's a set of soft dolls that you can purchase for infant toddler rooms that's like, I think there's 6 of them and they have 3 or 4 or 5 different skin colors and facial features, and those are wonderful if you have those in the room available. They get credit here. So
and does it also include their own pictures, the children's?
No, that's a really good question. Thank you for raising that, whoever raised that. Photographs of the children in the group and their families do not receive credit as pictures showing diversity in this item. Presumably because that's not diversity for these children. That's just their life. So, but those do get credit. In item number 5, display for children, we credit them as, you know, having photos of the enrolled children displayed, but not as diversity.
So a couple questions about this environment. So are soft blocks?
Yes.
And can dolls and stuffed animals count as soft toys and dramatic play items?
Yes. So we can double dip, and we do.
And should books and literature be placed in various areas, like in dramatic play and blocks?
Well, they can be. For the book item, there is a requirement at the 7 level that there's a book area set up for toddlers to use independently if you have toddlers in the room. But otherwise, I often see books in little baskets in different parts of the room where if you're sitting down and a baby crawls up to you and wants to be held, then a basket of books is very accessible and you can pull out a book and read to that child. Or those books then are easily accessible in baskets where you can put them near a non-mobile child. So that would be fine.
And here's a question. So if we're a combined infant and toddler for opening and closing? Sounds like you combine the infants and the toddlers at the beginning and end of the day, Nancy. Does she need to have blocks and art available for that limited time?
That's a good question too, and if we are in the room observing, that 20 minutes, we're only scoring that much of the day during the time that we are actually observing. So we are not factoring in times of the day that we do not observe for the 20 minutes. So that being said, of course it would be best practice to have a variety of materials that are appropriately challenging for the ages of the children in the room to be available and accessible to them in their opening and closing rooms. But we are only calculating that 20 minutes for much of the day when we are actually present scoring, doing the observation, that 3 hours. That's one big difference between ITERS and ECHRS. ECHRS, we look at the schedule from the opening, from the time the center opens to the time the center closes, and we evaluate that. But for ITERS, we do not do that. We calculate much of the day only during the time that we are there observing.
Sorry, there's a lot of questions.
Well, can I just say that we only have 15 minutes left to the webinar, and we have 2 more subscales to get through, so I'm going to move ahead, and then we will, like Andrea said, we're going to come back to questions at the end. I know they're all important, but some people may have to get off at 8 o'clock, and we want to be able to wrap up as much of this as possible. The next subscale is interactions, and these 4 items are scored: supervision of play and learning, peer interaction, staff-child interaction, and discipline. Supervision of play and learning, this requires that children are within sight, hearing, and easy reach of staff with no more than a few momentary lapses, and that you're paying attention pretty much all of the time. It's especially important if children are involved in any high-risk activities like using a climber, that you be close. So it's easy to have this not score high if you are not close to the children and paying close attention to them all of the time. And we do understand that there is a challenge there then if you are the only teacher in a room with 4 children. Even if it's 2 staff with 8 children, it's better to have 2 adults in the room. It helps with supervision. Peer interaction. This is one item that scores much of the day. At 3.1 it says peer interaction is possible much of the day. And this, the way that I most often see that not met is because a child is put in a bouncy seat or in an exercise or something where they cannot move closer to their peers, and maybe their peers are not mobile and not able to get to them. So being set aside like that prevents that child from interacting with his or her peers for the amount of time that they're actually in that piece of equipment or off to the side. I mean, it could be that a non-mobile baby is set in a corner of the room and is fine there for a while, but then nobody else is around. And so part of this is making sure that you as an adult are providing opportunities and encouraging peer interaction by putting non-mobile children close enough that they can see and interact with each other. Staff-child interaction, this refers to, or goes back to, really how much are you talking to the children, how warm are those interactions. Consider your tone of voice. Are you loving on the baby? Are you picking him or her up, holding them close, rubbing their backs, kissing them, snuggling them, tickling them, those kinds of things? Is it warm? Are you relaxed? Is the child responding positively? This generally scores high. I will tell you that, especially we're coming out into programs that are looking to get to 4 and 5 stars, and their staff are doing these things. And then discipline. This is mostly about, are your expectations for the children in your room appropriate for them? Are you able to, maintain control so that children are not hitting or hurting each other? Do you have enough materials so that children aren't fighting over their favorite things? And are you using positive methods of discipline effectively? So are you using redirection? Are you positively reinforcing behavior that you like to see by commenting on it? Are you helping children understand the effects of their actions by pointing out how another child is feeling based on something they're doing? And are you helping children to, even if they're not yet using words, are you helping them know when it's appropriate to use words instead of biting or hitting or pushing, whatever? So helping them learn to use communication, providing words, or encouraging those kids who are vocalizing to actually say something. And I will say that here, any use of a timeout in an ITERS room is considered severe discipline, and it will not score well. So we would not want to see that you're using timeout for children of this age. The final subscale is program structure, and as you can see here, there are two items where we consider much of the day, the schedule item and the free play item. Schedule, here what we're considering is that children actually have play activities available to them, that they can move around and use the materials in the room for much of the day. And that also you are individualizing the schedule for each individual child in your room, that you're feeding them on their schedule. And we understand that toddlers may be easing into a group schedule. Maybe, you know, especially older toddlers are probably sitting down to eat at the same time, also maybe napping closer to the same time. But that if a child is hungry or tired outside of one of those times, that you're meeting their needs. That you get, that they have indoor and outdoor play each day. And remember that that's also a licensing requirement. And if you're not sure about the weather permitting policy, let me encourage you to check with your licensor about what that is, for you know, what the temperature is that would permit you to stay inside. Otherwise, there's an expectation that, depending on the age of the children, that you're taking them outside every day. The free play item considers also much of the day, and indoors and outdoors play. It will also considers how many and the variety of materials that are accessible for children. And there's also, we consider your supervision here as well. Are you involved in playing with the children? Are you helping them access materials? Those types of things. Group play activities. This can be scored NA for all ITERS classrooms, regardless of the age of the children. If you require children to participate in a group activity, we will have to score it. And if you require children to participate in an activity, often it does not score very well, because Indicator 3.1 says children are never forced to participate in group play activities, meaning that they can leave the group whenever they want and do something else. And my experience doing observations is that usually if you require a group play activity, you require all of the children to be there throughout that. And as soon as we observe that a child is required or forced to remain in that group, then we have to score off at that indicator 3.1. So when people do ask me what my recommendation is for group activities, I always suggest that they not require anything, but that they offer them frequently. And it's very appropriate for a teacher to say, I'm going to read this book. Does anybody want to come and sit with me while I look at the pictures and read it? That's a very appropriate way to offer a group activity but not require it. Or to say that I'm going to color at the table. Does anybody want to come and color with me and have out some plain paper and some crayons, or another appropriate drawing utensil, and children who want to join you can, but those who do not are not required to. And if that's what we observe, we would score that NA. And then provisions for children with disabilities. This is an item that only applies to classrooms that have a child with an officially diagnosed disability. So generally speaking, that would be a child with an IFSP or something. And a lot of times in ITERS rooms, especially infant rooms where children are younger than 12 months, they might not even know unless there's something really obvious. A lot of times there's not been a diagnosis of anything yet. So this can be scored NA if there are no children that meet the requirements. If there are children that do have an IFSP or some other kind of assessment that's been completed and they have an official diagnosis, then this is mostly scored through interview. We would look to see that the children are involved in activities in the room, that you have appropriate materials and equipment for them, but otherwise we're mostly going to ask you interview questions about this. And that's the end of the ITERS rating scale. So we can take some questions now. And let me just say that that was a lot to cover. Usually this takes about a day to go through when we're training a new rater. So an hour and a half is not a lot of time. I tried to hit the highlights, but I hope I can answer some questions now.
Okay, so I am just going to, there are a lot of questions about sleeping, and so I'm going to go back to that chunk of them and try to get through those.
Okay.
Well, so first of all, can you please define swaddling and talk about what if swaddling is there's a doctor's note? I've never heard of that.
Okay, swaddling is anytime you wrap a child and you restrict their movement, you know, the movement of their limbs. So typically, I mean, there's blankets that are swaddling blankets that are designed specifically for that. Usually it's, you know, the child's got his or her arms down, tucked in tightly, and they end up looking like a little chrysalis, as my son said one time when he was swaddled. He had to get stitches, and that's why they were swaddling him. But I think, I mean, I don't know if there's a more technical definition of swaddling, but I think that we can all agree that it's wrapping a child tightly in a blanket so that they cannot move their arms and legs. And if there is a doctor's note, it would have to be, we've actually sent this question to the authors of the rating scale. It has to be specific to that one child and for a very specific purpose and for a finite amount of time, meaning not for the first year of their life. I mean, unless the doctor says that that is the parameter, but a child that a doctor is saying must be swaddled is probably a child that is seeing the doctor on a very regular basis as well, and that diagnosis and requirement would need to be revisited frequently. But it can't just be a blanket statement that I'm authorizing all of the babies in this child care program to be swaddled or anything like that. It has to be for a specific child, a specific reason, and a specific amount of time.
Okay, and then a couple questions about just the room. So what if your nap room has windows all around it, like a nursery? Is that still considered a separate room?
Yes, it is. If it requires a door to get into it.
And somebody has a different room that the younger children nap in, but the older children are in my eyesight. Would that still be rated a 1?
So what I'm understanding that question is the teacher goes into the nap room and stays in the nap room and leaves the other children free to play in the other room. It wouldn't be a 1 in nap, but it's going to be definitely not score well in supervision of those children who are playing, because now you're not supervising them as closely.
Well, if Cathedra, if I misunderstood that, type in a question again. I hope that helped. Over 12 months sleeping in a crib, does the blanket need to remain tucked in on 3 sides?
No, over 12 months, that's a, yeah, that requirement for it being tucked in goes away. And if a child, because let's face it, lots of kids by 6 months or 7 months, they're moving around in the bed, and they might untuck the blanket while they're sleeping if they're active sleepers, and then we do need to see that a teacher is paying attention and is going and tucking that blanket back in up until they're 12 months. And remember too that you should be putting a baby in their crib to sleep on their back.
What about cameras in the nap room?
It's still a separate nap room. Cameras are not, video is not a substitute for supervision because it doesn't pick up noise or the absence of noise. For instance, if a child stops breathing, the camera will not tell you that. Also, if a child begins to choke or something and there's no sound, you might not hear that or see that until, and then you still have to get to the child. If there's an emergency, I mean, those things are not a substitute for supervision. We certainly recognize that they aid in supervision, but they do not substitute for it.
Okay, we've got a couple questions about, can you change a diaper standing up? Can you change a diaper with the child standing up? Sorry.
Yes, like a potty training child. Yep, and your technical consultant will have information about that. Because I know I've written it. So it's been sent out to all the CCR&R offices around the state. So I'm just going to let you ask your TC for that.
So I'm going to move on to a group of questions more about environment and materials. So how often should materials be rotated? Is once a month often enough?
Yes, monthly. That's a minimum of monthly. That's a good question.
And if over 18 months, does sand and water play need to be observed or just provided during the day?
That's a good question. It needs to be provided daily to score high, but we don't necessarily have to observe it happening while we're there. We could ask you some questions about it.
So displays for children, can it be family photos, animal pictures, magazine pictures of children, etc.?
Yes. They should be covered, laminated, put between contact paper, put behind a piece of plexiglass or something like that to protect them. So because we understand that children at this age might touch them, grab them, try to pull them off the wall. So that's a consideration in display. And
here's something about accessibility. So if you're working on something, the child wants to play with something else. If I say not now, but later, is that accessible?
It depends on, probably not. I mean, if you say not now, I'm doing this and I will come get it as soon as I can, and then I observe that you go and get it down for the child right away, then I would probably consider that accessible. If you say not now, later, and I never see you get it down the entire time of the observation, I would not give credit for much of the day for whatever that item was.
Okay, so it's 8:01, and so I just want to give a little information for people that need to leave at 8 o'clock. So registry credit, an email will go out tomorrow, and that will have a link to a SurveyMonkey. It's the training evaluation, and you do need to complete that within a week. Like I said, if you're watching in a group, the group leader, the person who logged in, will receive that email, and he or she should forward that to everybody in the group if you can. The survey will give you the opportunity to print a certificate from it. But this is a tiered training, and so WICA will enter the roster within 4 weeks so that it will be on your registry account. There's our email addresses if you have any questions at all. I do want to thank everybody for participating. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And we will I'm now going to go back and try to group the questions, and we will just go through them one by one until they're all answered. So thanks, everybody. All right, so Jody, I'm not sure what your question is. With room arrangement, if the space is small, what do you do with seeing kids with dealing with cribs? Does that mean anything to you?
Well, I'm assuming that it means that the cribs take up most of the space, and so children play maybe between cribs or, behind cribs or something. And that is actually going to be a barrier for your indoor space, where it says enough indoor space for children, adults, and furnishings. This is at the 3 level. That the children aren't crowded when they play. They shouldn't be playing, under and around the cribs. And so it's just not going to score well. I don't really know how to say that any differently than that. But if the space is so crowded that the cribs interfere with your ability as the teacher to see the kids because they're either behind them, between them, or under them, that's going to be a problem.
Okay. A couple things about music. So we've used, with 15 to 24 months, a little Einstein movement in music videos on a limited basis. It's not acceptable because they're under 24 months, right?
Absolutely. It's definitely going to score a 1 for the use of TV, video, and computer.
And another one about music, and now I can't find it. I'm sorry. All right, well, I will come back to that. So this is about thumbtacks and staples, so they both can't be used?
They should not be used in the classroom in an area where if they fell, They would be accessible to the children. Or I've seen it where, you know, there's a big bulletin board with stuff on it and the kids' cribs are righted. So when the child stood up in his crib, he was pulling stuff off of the bulletin board. I mean, that would be not a good idea.
Sorry, I'm going to advance to the end. So I'm going to, sorry, there's our email addresses for you again. Somebody says they worked somewhere where they got marked down for the bottle warmer because it got too hot. So we suggested bottle warmers earlier. Somebody has an experience where that wasn't good. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I can't speak to that. Every bottle warmer that I've ever seen, actually the water, it's like a teaspoon or a tablespoon of water, and it literally boils off. It's gone. So there's no way to measure the temperature of it. Maybe there's another kind of bottle warmer that I'm not familiar with. Probably there is.
Okay. Can you use Pandora for music for the babies at nap time?
Sure. I mean, you can have Pandora on. I've actually seen that used in child care centers where the Pandora is playing in the director's office and the speakers in the classrooms are using it. I have not seen it used where in the classroom where the screen is accessible to the child. But I do see Pandora used. In the same way that I see iPods used, though. It's not accessible to the children, it's just the music playing through the speakers.
Can we have diverse music from other countries playing as background music for a short time? I'm assuming that's about the diversity section.
Yes, absolutely. Just remember, and that's usually how we see it, remember limited time, positive purpose, and at that point it doesn't really matter what the kind of music is, but I would definitely recommend that you play all types of music, including multicultural music during those times when you're playing that.
And Sarah says they have soft cars with drivers that are multicultural.
Sounds
Does that
great.
Count? Okay.
Yep.
And blocks for infants, no need for under 12 months, or do they still need a soft type of block?
Nope, if they're under 12 months, blocks are not a requirement.
If a child falls asleep while on a walk, is that okay? It's difficult to have the entire group awake, fed, and ready to go outside as a group when they're individual schedules.
Yes, it is okay. I mean, it happens. What we would want to see then as soon as you get back, if the child is still asleep, is that you move that child to his or her bed immediately.
When was the last time the ITERS books were revised?
Geez, I don't actually know.
Sarah,
but the ITERS is undergoing a revision right now, and it's actually being tested. They are I think the testing and everything is done. It's the hope for that, they're calling it the ITERS 3, is that would be released sometime by the end of this year, but YoungStar will not be adopting that version of it anytime soon, just because we want to see it go through its validity testing in the field before we would start to use it. And to my knowledge, the ITERS has not even been, they're not in the process of rewriting that one.
What's the requirement for group participation 24 months and older?
There isn't a requirement. I mean, if they're in an ITERS room, if a child is in an ITERS room, there's not a requirement for a group time. I think that's the question, is if they're 24 months and older, are they required to be part of are we required to have group activities? And no, if they're in an ITERS room. And ITERS, remember, goes up to 2.5, which is 30 months. So it's not required.
If we're doing a handprint activity, say with finger paint as a sensory activity, is it okay to put the child in the high chair while we do that, as long as it's not more than 20 minutes and the child seems to enjoy the activity?
Well, so you're just doing it like you're using a paintbrush and putting water on the child's hand, and the kid is enjoying it and the child's up there involved in it the entire time, that's fine. If the child gives any indication that he or she wants to get down and is no longer having fun, and because you have 4 kids in high chairs and you're doing this and that child has to wait, that won't score well. But as long as the child's enjoying it and you're interacting, that can be a very positive and warm thing.
There's a couple questions about the other webinars, and so I'm going to reply to those privately. So if we have one toddler over 12 months, but the rest are all under 12 months, do we have to have all the requirements for the 12-month-old, for an example, a water table accessible?
No, water's not required for kids under 18 months.
Okay.
So no to the water table. And then that's one of those tricky questions because there's some little qualifiers. So if, let's say you have a room and there's 4 children in that room and the oldest child is 13 months, there's one child that's 13 months, there's one child that's 10 months, one that's 8 months, and one that's 2 months, because you only have one child over 12 months and that child is only like 1 month older, there's not a requirement for that. But it gets a little sticky. I mean, the ITERS rating scale does actually have this written out in it at the very beginning of it, where there's some definitions, and it tells you that that if there's requirements for a certain item for certain ages, if there's only one child that meets the requirement for their age and they're less than a month older than that age cutoff, then you don't have to have that. But if, let's say, there's 2 children that are over 12 months in that room, then yes, you would be required to have it.
All right. Is there a maximum time a child can be out of his or her classroom, like going for a walk or outside?
Well, not really, but if you take a very long walk, for instance, and as a result of that long walk, children do not have access to the materials, and it's an abnormally long walk. One time I was doing an observation and they literally were gone outside for like 2 hours. Well, then that's an abnormally long amount of time to be outside, and the kids didn't have access to any materials then during that time, so that was not good. If they're outside for 30 minutes or 45 minutes and they're actively engaged in gross motor play, and or part of that time was taking a walk and then part of that time is free play with materials outside, then that is not unreasonable. So I think what you're asking is, if you're outside for 30 to 45 minutes, does that score against much of the day for materials that are inside? And it won't, provided children are actively involved in what you're doing outside. Now, the one caveat to that is that if you take children on a walk and they're in a stroller, so it's a stroller walk, or they're in a buggy or a wagon or something, for longer than 20 minutes, then you will not receive credit for much of the day for active physical play, because for the 20 minutes or however or longer that you're in the stroller or the wagon or something, they are not able to be involved actively, like gross motor. But if it's a 10-minute walk and then the rest of the time they're playing outside, then that 10 minutes doesn't count against much of the day at all, because it's short. Does that make sense, I hope, to people?
It seems like there's a number of questions about people that have infants to 2-year-olds all day long. So maybe they would be advised to attend the ITERS crosswalk?
I see. So you mean, well, if they're all infants and 2-year-olds, then they are all covered by ITERS. The crosswalk webinar that we're going to be doing next week will apply to people who have 2 to 3-year-old classrooms, I would say. Kids that range in age from under the 2.5-year cutoff for ITERS to roughly turning 3, usually in that second year. I guess technically that's a 3rd year of life.
And can you use staples and bulletin boards in preschool rooms?
As long as the children are not putting them in their mouths. If I saw a child pick it up and put it in his mouth, I would cite it as a safety hazard regardless of the age of the child.
And, oh, sorry, she's left. I'm going to delete that. So what if you have audio and video cameras? Back to the naps.
It's still not a substitute for supervision. It helps, it's not a substitute.
And some babies will flip over. You put them down on their back.
That's fine. If the baby can turn over on his or her own, that's fine. They can assume their own comfortable sleep position once you put them in on their back.
What if you have children that have doctor's notes to sleep in a bouncy seat or swing, like maybe they need to be upright somewhat? Is that okay?
It is okay, but then you need to do one of either of these things. Either that bouncy seat or swing or whatever should be dedicated to that child, just like the child's crib is dedicated to him. Or if it's a piece of equipment that you use for other children during the day, then make sure that before you put that child in there to sleep that you have covered the seat or whatever with a blanket or something so that it is not what we would call a shared sleep surface. And I've seen that done very successfully, just a small receiving blanket or something that's large enough to cover the surface, but not something big and bulky that makes the baby not fit in there anymore. But just something so that the child is not sleeping on the same surface, the same fabric surface that any other child was on. Even though they can do that when they're awake. I know that sort of doesn't make sense, but that's the rule.
So for a child with disabilities who's over 14 months chronologically but not developmentally and who's still in the infant room, what materials does he or she need access to?
Materials that are developmentally appropriate. And so in an instance like that, first of all, it would probably be evident to the rater if there's a 14 or 18-month child who's not moving yet and not sitting up, or it's probably evident to the rater that developmentally this is where that child is. But that is also something that would come up during the interview when we talked about how you are preparing and planning and implementing things child.
Sorry, say that again. You cut out for a second.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, just that in the interview you would be able to share information about how you are planning and meeting the needs of the child. So you could confirm the developmental age of the child at that point if necessary.
What if you are talking to one parent and you miss an interaction with another parent?
Well, I think it would be good to encourage the parent to wait until you could have the interaction, or ask one parent to wait if you know that parent can stay longer. But you're still going to be required, I'm assuming you're talking about exchanging information during greetings.
Yeah.
Yes, and the requirement is still there that information be exchanged. So maybe you would put the other parent on pause for a minute.
I'm sure that's challenging. Everybody's so busy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go to our website in just a second. There's a bunch of questions about where the trainings are, so I'll show you that in just a moment.
Oh, do they mean the other webinars?
Yeah.
Maybe? Okay.
Is it okay to do water play under 12 months with supervision?
It is okay. It frequently does not score very well because of that indicator 3.2 that says close supervision, and if there's any eating or drinking of the play materials or throwing it, and especially water. I mean, as we all know, children can drown in an inch of water, so I mean that it's very, very important that supervision of that be very close.
And so the WICA website is wisconsinearlychildhood.org, and there's a training tab up at the top. And so if you're ever wondering about any of the trainings that are coming up or happening, we do send an email out every month, sometimes twice a month. And here is where you can sign up for that. It says sign up to receive trainings at WICA monthly emails. But this is where all of the trainings are listed. And so we do have a family childcare on Thursday, and then next week we've got a school-age childcare, and then this bridging the gap from ITERS to ECHRS. So I have not posted all of the ones that we've done yet. We've done 2 so far. This is our third, yes, right?
This is our third.
And so I think I got the first one posted to the website, and I haven't yet gotten last Thursday's, so I am working on it. If you ever want to access those, I'm going to send you the link in our follow-up email, but this is where you will enter your email address. You'll get a reply email with a link to confirm, and then that will also give you the link to that page. Okay, there's a few more questions. So what if we say we're going to do a certain art activity? Do we actually need to physically participate? So we aren't telling them and not doing so.
I'm not sure that I entirely understand the question. Can you read it again to me?
So here, I'll just read it verbatim, and Jessica, type something more in if I'm misunderstanding. So if we say we're going to do a certain art activity, do we actually need to physically participate?
Oh, you mean as the staff person. If you say we're going to sit down and we're going to paint here, and does the staff person need to do it? No. The other way that I could interpret that question is if you say you're going to do it, like for instance it's on your lesson plans, does it have to be done that day? And the answer to that also is no.
Okay. What about a child who's further advanced in their age? Can you place them in a different classroom for some activities? This person has an 18-month-old that can count, do ABCs. Can she do activities with the 24-month-olds?
Sure. That's a programming question. There's not any requirement for ITERS that they be, at certain ages be in certain rooms.
Okay. So here's Jessica. So Rebecca mentioned inviting the kids into an art activity. Tell them, I want to color, who wants to color with me? What if the activity is finger painting? If we invite them in this way, do we, the teachers, have to participate in the finger painting?
No, you could say, yeah, so you don't have to take me exactly literally. I mean, you could say, I'm going to put out some finger paints, and if you want to come and finger paint, I will sit here with you and you can do that, or whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be that you're going to do it with them. But I would suggest that you have close supervision.
And Danielle says, we were marked down for having our dry erase markers out because the cap is a choking hazard. If we use our whiteboard very often throughout the day, where do you suggest we put the markers?
I just suggest that you have those out of reach of the children. And I have seen a variety of ways that that is done well. Putting a little Velcro dot thing on them, you know, way up at the top, so one piece of the Velcro stays on the board and the other piece is on the marker, so that when you're done using the marker, it's Velcroed up there. I've seen them kept in bins with a lid that kids can't get open, like a big peanut butter jar or something, you know, that you can screw the lid on tightly. Something like that. The individual markers are not labeled keep out of reach of children, so it's not like they have to be locked away, but they have to be inaccessible to the children. So however you see fit to do that, so the kids can't access them, will be fine.
I think we have just about everything. For free play, if you set out areas for play, does this count as free play?
I'm assuming that that question means that if you have an area, I mean, maybe you set out 2 puzzles on the table and maybe you have some shape sorters somewhere. If you put out specific materials and you only allow the children to use those materials, it might be free play with those materials, but you're going to run into a problem with much of the day for the other materials. But if you put out those materials and those are things that are at the tables, but you allow the children to go access other materials, then that is not a problem.
And did you say high chairs can be used as an art area as well as an eating area?
Yes, I've seen that done. Make sure that you use the two-step cleaning and sanitizing process for the tray before it's used for food service.
And Christy says that there's a free ERSI training September 27th from 8:30 to 12 in Pewaukee with Debbie Cryer.
Oh, that's correct. Yes, they probably just got that information today. Yes, there is the Department of Children and Families has invited some folks from ERSI to come. They will actually be in town for a couple days. There's well, they're going to be in town for a week, but there's a session open on Friday and Saturday. Saturday is, I believe, the day for providers and the public. And Bridget, if you want to shoot a little note in there and confirm that, because I don't have that information right in front of me, but I'm pretty sure that it's Friday is for 4K and Saturday is for general providers and the public.
Okay. Christy says people can contact Penny Chase or their TC if they need more information.
That's true.
Do they really have to be covered with a blanket? What if the nap room has its own temperature control and we eliminate
Licensing
blankets?
actually requires that. So check with your licensor about the requirements for nap linens. But I do know that there is a requirement that they have something to lie down on, a sheet or something, and something to cover with. So for some ages, like older than 1 year of age, a sleeping bag will count for that. But that is not considered appropriate for children younger than a year. So check with your licensor about the requirement for that.
I think we answered that. Oh, is there a rule as far as enough light to see children's faces when they're napping?
No, not that I'm aware of, unless there's some rule for licensing about that.
Okay, can you expand on the rating of art? We do floor time with a group of babies where we put out paint and paper and let them paint. And we also put them in high chairs with paint. But when they do crawl away while on the floor or show they don't want to be, or show they don't want to paint, we remove them from the area.
And these are children younger than 12 months, presumably.
Presumably. Should we then do NA instead?
That's entirely up to you, but read that item very carefully in the rating scale. I'm assuming that you have access to a copy of the rating scale either in your center, or I believe that you can access those through the CCIC. Most CCR&Rs also have copies that they will lend out. But I would read the item very carefully and make sure that whatever the experience is, that the materials are appropriate for that age, and that the supervision is appropriate for that age. But I'm not going to make a recommendation that you take an NA there. That has to be a decision that you make. Just make it with as much information as you possibly can.
Bridget says that's correct. Thanks, Bridget. In terms of the timing, right, of the training?
Yes, okay, thank you, Bridget. I think that is what she meant.
We were told permanent Sharpie markers needed to be locked away. Is this accurate, or can they be in an inaccessible drawer? Do they need to be locked?
If they are labeled keep out of reach of children, then they should be marked away. Then they should be locked away. If they are not labeled that, then there isn't that requirement. Most markers, yeah, Andrea is pulling one out to look at them, have that non-toxic seal on them that just, they meet that AP requirement, and they don't say keep out of reach of children. Because it's not expressly labeled that, I don't require that it be But
Okay.
I would also expect that you're not actually leaving it out accessible to a child, because I'm assuming that you're using good common sense about what's appropriate for children to be using. But I've never required that those individual markers specifically labeled the way this one is right here on this desk, is that they be locked away. I can double check on that.
What if a parent doesn't want the child to be covered? What do you do then?
I would have a conversation with your licensor about that. I'm not in a position to make those kinds of decisions, especially when the licensing rule requires something specific. I just can't. I mean, I might be able to say, well, this is how it would score in the environment rating scales or whatever, but licensing is the minimum, and that's actually a regulation. And so with everything, that's the first thing you have to consider. And I believe DCF has done a very good job of considering licensing and then the environment rating scales, and understanding that the environment rating scales are an add-on, if you will. And generally, they're looking at a higher level of quality. But there are times when something would actually meet the requirements of the environment rating scales, but would not meet the requirement of licensing. And in those instances, licensing is the requirement. That you have to follow licensing. That's your regulation. And so if you have a really specific question like that, I would definitely check with your licensor on that, because I don't know the answer to it, and I'm not sure. I don't want to tell you you can do something and then your licensor cites you for it.
Bridget's telling us that programs should check with licensing on swaddling as well.
All right.
Jonathan says you have to lock all marker caps. What's a cozy area for an infant? Just clarify that.
That's an area that has a substantial amount of softness that is available for an infant to, you know, escape the hardness of the floor, and it does have to be protected from active play. So it can be, you know, I know I gave the example earlier of a small wading pool that a program had put into their infant room, and then they had put a boppy pillow into it, and there was you know, some other padding in there that they had cut to fit into the bottom of that pool, and then they could put a child in that space, so that child was alone or just with one other child, and it was protected from the mobile toddlers in the space, and it was cushioned. So all of those things made it meet the requirement of a cozy area.
And then somebody's requesting the diaper changing and hand washing procedures, and what we said is that you should check with your technical consultant, right?
Because they have them, yes. So I promise you that they have them all written out, the descriptions. They can go over it with you. We have gone over it many times with them, and I mean, they can give it to you in writing.
All right. All right. Well, that's it. So thank you, everybody, so much for coming.
Yes, thank you very much.
And maybe we will see you on, wait, what's Thursday?
Thursday is family child care.
Family child care, yeah.
Probably most of you will not be on for family child care because it might not apply, but then next week we are doing school age, and then that's on Wednesday, and on Thursday we are doing what we call an ITERS and ITERS crosswalk. So for those of you who are in a classroom that has young 2-year-olds and older 2-year-olds, and your room might be ITERS part of the time and might be ITERS part of the time, you will probably find that particular webinar very helpful.
All right, thank you. Good night, everybody.